From the smallest tadpole to the largest salamander, frogs have been everywhere and adapted to almost all environments on Earth. They're also not known for being particularly dangerous. Sure, there are a few toxic species, but most frogs are completely harmless to humans. It seems like these little critters have it pretty easy in the grand scheme of things. And we've probably made their lives even easier by wiping out many of their natural predators. But this hasn't always been the case. 70 million years ago, Madagascar was home to a giant frog that would make short work of any animal unlucky enough to cross its path. Nicknamed the devil frog, this massive beast grew over 40 centimeters long and weighed more than 4 kilos. In fact, it was so big that it could easily snatch an adult human hand in its mouth. But this was no ordinary amphibian. Hi, it's me, and this is my channel. Today we'll be exploring the strange biology of Beelzebufo. What makes this ancient frog so fascinating? Why does it still terrify scientists today? And what can it teach us about the history of life on Earth? Frogs, as we know them today, come in a huge variety of shapes and sizes. There are hundreds of species alive today, and they occupy niches in nearly every ecosystem on Earth. Even so, the vast majority of frogs are relatively small, rarely getting much bigger than a few inches in length. The biggest exception to this rule is the Goliath frog. Native to Cameroon and Nigeria, this endangered species can reach lengths of up to 32 centimeters and weigh over 3 kilograms. That's around the size of a basketball. So, while big, this amphibian isn't exactly a monster. In comparison, the Beelzebufo was absolutely gargantuan. According to fossil evidence, it first appeared on the island of Madagascar around 72 million years ago. This would have been shortly after the mass extinction that killed off the dinosaurs, which means that this frog could have potentially hunted dino babies. The idea is kind of crazy because given how big and powerful the Tyrannosaurus rex was, it's hard to imagine its offspring being so tiny and helpless. But the truth is that baby dinosaurs were actually quite large. Some species like Ankylosaurus were born fully armored and able to fend for themselves within hours of hatching. But others like Archaeopteryx were flightless and totally dependent on their parents for food and safety. As such, frogs might have played an important role in the struggle for survival among early birds and reptiles. But how did such a bizarre creature come to be? To answer that question, let's look at the bones. Fossilized remains of the devil frog have been found in multiple locations across Madagascar. These include skulls, jaws, teeth, shoulder blades, and even a nearly complete skeleton. This has allowed researchers to reconstruct its appearance and estimate its size. Based on this evidence, paleontologists have concluded that the Beelzebufo would have looked similar to a modern-day bullfrog with some very important differences. First off, its skull was massive. At 18 centimeters long, it would have been large enough to completely engulf an entire chicken. Inside the skull, the devil frog had powerful jaws full of sharp teeth, which it used to deliver a bone-crushing bite. It had strong legs and webbed feet, which may have helped it swim and gave it incredible jumping ability. In fact, this frog could have easily leaped 10 meters through the air. And finally, it had bulging eyes that could pop out of their sockets. Scientists think that this was an adaptation to help the animal capture prey. By popping its eyes forward, the frog could get a better look at whatever was in front of it and then gulp it down whole. So you're probably wondering, what exactly did this thing eat? Well, the answer is basically anything that fit in its mouth. Unlike modern frogs, which are mostly insectivores or omnivores, the Beelzebufo was a dedicated carnivore. Its size and strength meant that it could hunt larger prey than other animals of its time. In fact, this frog was likely one of the top predators in its environment. Using its massive teeth, it would have crushed the skulls of smaller creatures and quickly devoured their brains. Given its bulging eyes, it likely fed on reptiles like snakes and lizards, as well as small mammals, birds, and their eggs. In fact, the devil frog could have easily snatched a human child from a riverbank and gobbled it up. But perhaps its favorite meal was baby dinosaurs. With a population of small proto-wading birds, the island would have been a perfect place for this frog to raise a family. And those same baby birds would have been an excellent source of nutrition. Unfortunately for them, the Beelzebufo also laid eggs. Like most frogs, it would have laid hundreds of them at a time in shallow pools or slow-moving streams. Unlike most frogs, however, the eggs were massive. Each one was about the size of a ping-pong ball. And this is where things get really strange. You see, modern frogs lay their eggs in water and then promptly forget about them. It's up to the environment to incubate the eggs and protect them from predators until they hatch. But Beelzebufo took a different approach. To understand what this was, we need to look at another famous frog, the red-eyed tree frog. This Central American amphibian lays its eggs high up in the rainforest canopy. Once the eggs are laid, the male immediately jumps into protective dad mode. He builds a foam nest around the eggs and guards them until they hatch. The Beelzebufo appears to have done something similar. Its eggs were likely incubated on land in some sort of artificial nest. This would have protected them from predators and provided a safe place for them to develop. And the males likely guarded the nest until the eggs hatched. All of this is pure speculation based on modern examples, but it's the best guess that scientists have to work with. Speaking of eggs, the Beelzebufo would have been active during the Cretaceous period, a time when Earth was much warmer than it is today. Fossils suggest that the climate of Madagascar was similar to that of Central Africa during the summer, hot and humid with lots of rainfall. This made rivers and streams overflow and created shallow pools for frogs to lay their eggs in. Not only would this have been ideal for the Beelzebufo, but it would have also provided plenty of food for them to eat. Plants would have grown rapidly and produced berries, leaves, and insects for the frogs to consume. It truly was the perfect time and place for a giant frog monster to evolve. Based on the size of its teeth, scientists think that the Beelzebufo had developed by around 40 million years ago. This would have been after the mass extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs. But it would have been before the emergence of mammals. For millions of years, it would have reigned supreme on the island of Madagascar, but like all monsters, it didn't last forever. Sometime around 66 million years ago, the Beelzebufo went extinct. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly why this happened. Maybe it was outcompeted for resources by another species, or maybe it simply evolved into something else. What we do know is that its extinction left a void in the ecosystem. Without a top predator to keep them in check, other animals flourished. For example, the descendants of the giant lemurs arrived in Madagascar around this time. These primates thrived and eventually gave rise to the iconic species we know and love today. So, what can we learn from the story of the Beelzebufo? Well, for starters, it shows us that frogs weren't always small, harmless creatures. In fact, they once dominated the planet and were among the most deadly predators of their time. It also reminds us that we shouldn't underestimate the power of evolution. Over the course of just a few million years, the Beelzebufo went from being a tiny tadpole to the largest frog that ever lived. And finally, it shows us that monsters aren't always what they seem. While the Beelzebufo was certainly a fearsome creature, it was also a loving parent who took care of its young. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more monster stories. Also, a big thank you to my supporters. Your support helps me make these videos possible, and I really appreciate it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. See you next time.